Hello and welcome back. Today I want to get primer on this bed as well as the hood for the truck. The hood is bare aluminum, so I want to use a good epoxy sealer for both. Especially where the primer is, I want to get a good seal over the bare metal and the primer, and then I will put a good quality surfacer over the whole thing where I can sand it and get rid of all the deep scratches. One of the things about painting in the garage is the mess, the dust that I get all over the place. So I have decided to purchase a paint booth. These portable paint booths, I've seen a few of them online. They look pretty interesting. They look like they'll work well. I wanted to give one a shot. My garage is 2 cars deep and 2 cars wide. So I have just enough room to fit almost a full-size paint booth. It's not quite big enough to put a full truck in, but it's good enough to be able to put in a small car. I was hoping I could paint the cab of the truck in this paint booth, but the cab is just a little bit too tall for my ceiling. My ceiling is 9 feet tall. This paint booth is 9 feet tall. So that works out really good, but the pillars that are on the top of this paint booth are about 18 inches in diameter, hanging down, so it was just enough that I couldn't get up on top of the cab with my spray gun and comfortably be able to paint. So I went ahead and painted the cab in the garage without this paint booth, and it worked out great. Now, with all the pieces that I need to do, I've got the doors I need to paint, I've got the hood I need to paint, bumper, grill, bed. I'll be able to do it in this booth, and I'll be able to keep all the dust out, and hopefully I'll keep the mess out of the garage. So let's give it a shot. Let's blow it up and see what it looks like. If you haven't seen one of these, what it is, it's like a big bounce house. It's got 2 blower motors. One blower motor airs the whole thing up, and the other blower motor cycles and circulates all the air through the booth. It's got filters on the front and filters in the back. It's got an area in the back. It's a little workable area where you can mix your paint, set up your air hose and things to come through. So I'll plug in those big blowers and we'll get this thing aired up. Well, for the first time using the paint booth, I'm very happy. I'm pleased with it. Did a great job keeping down all the dust, kept good airflow. The filters worked really well to filter out all the dust from my garage. I did 3 heavy coats of epoxy on the hood. I wanted to really seal up that aluminum well. And then I did just 1 quick coat of epoxy on the bed, and then did 3-4 coats of primer surfacer, especially in this area. Let's see, just a little bit of an outline of my filler. So I'm going to have to hit this. There's a little teeny bit of an edge from where the filler is, so I'll just skim coat that with the lightweight filler, and then block sand this whole thing, and that will get rid of that little wave. Yeah, I'm really excited. It's a little dark in here, but I set up some lights, and size-wise, it's just right for doing parts and pieces, fenders and doors. So it worked out really well for what I had intended on this. If I ever decided to paint a small car in here, do a little sports car or something, it would work out really well for that. As it cures, it bubbles. Now what's gone wrong? So as I start digging this out, I'm noticing a pattern. The filler I put on, the top coat, and you can see it pretty much matches what's coming off. I used dolphin glaze. I've never used it before. It's a two-part. I usually just use a glazing putty that's a single part, but I've heard that the single stage glazing putties have a tendency to get really dry and brittle and crack, so I thought I'd try this out. I've used U-POL fillers before. I've never used a glazing filler though. But that's pretty much exactly where I wiped this stuff, and it has softened all the way down to the epoxy primer I put on. So was the epoxy primer bad? Was that the fault? Or just what was it? But it appears to be this activated or liquefied that epoxy primer. Maybe the epoxy primer wasn't cured long enough, but I think it was. The epoxy primer I used was a Summit Racing leftover that I had from a few years ago. I used it a lot over the Buick project. Never had any problems with it at all, but I used it on the Camaro and I had some failure, and I used it on this and I had some failure. So now I'm beginning to think that maybe there's a combination of using this type of a product and filler and that epoxy primer that just isn't compatible. Well, I am convinced now that the dolphin filler that I spread across the top, for whatever reason, liquefied that epoxy primer. The filler is solid once I get below all that. So, live and learn. We'll put a coat of this filler. The filler seems to be good. I'll put a coat of that on there. I sanded it with 80 grit, so it's got a pretty deep scratch. When I welded this area, I welded it and then ground it smooth, so you lose that dimple from the spot weld. What I do is I'll take a piece of sandpaper and glue it to the end of a pencil, and I'll just mimic a spot weld. Depending on how much primer and filler you have on there, you just keep grinding that down until you end up with a pretty good size divot all the way through the primer. Take it down as close as you can to the bare metal, and it'll give you that look and appearance of a spot weld. So it's a little bit hard to see, but there's my spot welds that I sanded in with a pencil drill. I'll just kind of prime this so you can see them show up. Now, in the light, you'll see 3 spot welds. And then once I fine sand this and paint it, it will look like the factory seam. I'll do the same thing up here. You can see the 2 spots that I sanded in here too. And there you can see the same look along the top end. It gives it that factory look.